5 years ago, I was on an airplane headed to Guatemala to teach trauma recovery yoga. 10 minutes before landing, a message popped up on my phone that read, "Your dad passed away. Call your sister." I read the message a few times, unable to fully comprehend the meaning of the words, until finally it sank in and time stopped. A rush of tingly energy moved slowly from my feet, up my legs, but before it reached my hips, I realized I was holding my breath. So I focused on my inhales and exhales. My heart started racing, and I knew that my stress response system had kicked in. I then counted the windows on the plane, reorienting myself, felt the seatbelt on my stomach, grounding myself, and started repeating silently, "I am okay, I am breathing." A few minutes later, I stumbled off the plane and paced back and forth in the airport, just trying to digest what was happening. But you see, because I logically understood what was happening in my body at the time, and had the tools to calm my mind and body through self-regulation, I was able to complete what we call the stress cycle, the natural process our body goes through in response to stress, and therefore experience what it means to process trauma, to let it move through me. Why should processing trauma matter to you? Well, exposure to traumatic events is really common. In fact, according to researchers at Cambridge University, for every 10 people in this room, 7 of us will have experienced a traumatic event, many of us experiencing multiple traumas. So knowing how to handle those situations before they happen is a game changer. Today, I want to take you on a journey of how understanding trauma and its impact on my brain and body has completely changed my life, and how, with just a little information and some practical mind-body tools, it could change yours too. 6 months before that experience, I was first introduced to trauma recovery yoga, or TRY, a science-based somatic or body-focused therapy comprised of trauma-informed breath work, movement, and meditation, all intentionally pieced together into a yoga sequence designed to bring balance into the brain and body. I'd been studying the science of trauma, how it can affect our brains, bodies, behaviors, and was fortunate enough to be mentored by the creators of the TRY method, Joyce and Darwin Boson. I shadowed them, participating in and then co-facilitating TRY trainings around the United States, where I heard hundreds of people's stories of trauma and healing, and saw the consistent impact of these mind-body practices on the lives of trauma survivors. As I continued to deepen my understanding of trauma dynamics and symptoms, apply what I was learning in my own life, and expand my capacity to be present and regulated in stressful situations, I became more trauma-informed. And this shift in my perspective showed up in my daily life. It's like I could suddenly see with X-ray vision, understanding the underlying why of my own behavior, the behavior of others, and could make sense of otherwise illogical situations that I'd been in. As my perspective widened, I naturally shifted from thinking, "What's wrong with you?" to "What happened to you?" And practically overnight, with this newfound understanding, became more compassionate with myself and others. And this black and white world that I had come to know suddenly became a lot more nuanced. So let's start with the basics. When you experience stress or trauma, you go through a 4-step process called the stress cycle. First, there's a trigger. Something upsetting happens externally. Then your body reacts physically and involuntarily, flooding the body with stress hormones, activating the alarm system in your brain, the amygdala, and preparing your body to either confront the danger, to run away, or to play dead. These are your fight, flight, or freeze responses. Then, once your body is ready, within seconds, it takes one of these actions or inactions. And lastly, once the danger is gone or the event is finished, ideally you're able to complete the stress cycle, which we can do using different tools like movement, mindfulness, breathing, shaking, crying, or social connection, to name a few. This last step of the stress cycle is crucial, allowing the physical aspect of trauma to move through you. And yet, it's the part that many of us are either skipping because we're unaware of it altogether, or it's disrupted by the overwhelming nature of a traumatic event, which can make it impossible to process at the time and often requires more structured interventions like ongoing talk therapy or somatic support. The traumatic situation I described could have easily turned out very different had I not understood what was happening in my body and had the tools to self-regulate. Let's imagine, hypothetically, that this happened instead. It would have begun the same. After I read the message, my body would have started reacting, experiencing a surge of adrenaline, heart rate increasing, unconsciously holding my breath. But here's where things could have taken a different turn. Instead of realizing what was happening and focusing on my breathing, I could have become overwhelmed by intense fear, panic, or anxiety, my racing thoughts taking me to worst-case scenarios. Instead of reorienting and grounding myself, I could have quickly become disconnected or dissociated from my body, and maybe even felt like I was experiencing the situation from outside of myself. I would have been even more disoriented exiting the plane and wouldn't have been able to think clearly enough to navigate my way home from a busy airport on the other side of the country, let alone start processing the gravity of the situation. Both scenarios I described would be considered traumatic events, which is any deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms your ability to cope with or handle it. But there's an important difference. In my case, I was able to complete the stress cycle by self-regulating and then moving my body. Whereas in the second hypothetical scenario, I wouldn't have been able to process those excess stress hormones because I was stuck, and therefore would have stored them somewhere in my body. American psychologist Tara Brach said, "Our issues are in our tissues." Dutch psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk has famously coined that the body keeps the score. Both are referring to trauma being stored in the body. But what does that look like in an average person like you or me? Physically storing unprocessed trauma could look like chronic muscle tension, especially in areas like the neck, shoulders, back, or hips. One could have other physical symptoms like headaches, stomach aches, or pain in various parts of the body, all of which is otherwise unexplained medically. In the long term, if trauma remains unprocessed or unaddressed, it could lead to more severe chronic mental or physical conditions, including persistent pain, a weakened immune system, post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, anxiety or depression disorders, or substance abuse to try and cope with the pain. Because so much of the trauma experience is physical, movement is an often forgotten key element to healing, necessary to not only process trauma in the moment or immediately afterwards, but to recover from trauma symptoms and to build resilience to better handle trauma in the future, the latter having been my saving grace. We have two main approaches to trauma recovery: top-down and bottom-up. Top-down is using the mind to influence the body, Whereas bottom up, what I do is using the body to influence the mind. Both methods are essential and complementary, and when one has access to both talk therapy and somatic support, they have a much fuller opportunity to integrate their trauma. Over time, my mission has become clear: helping people feel safer and calmer in their bodies to live more empowered lives. How? Restoring balance between the brain and body by learning and practicing mind-body techniques, many of which can be used to complete a stress cycle, including trauma-informed breath work, meditation, self-regulation, and trauma recovery yoga. The following testimonials from participants here in the Middle East illustrate some of this impact I'm referring to. By the end of an 8-week TRY program, a Yazidi woman who had survived the 2014 genocide told me, "I can breathe again," after consistently practicing simple breathing techniques. A Syrian refugee woman expressed how, through one of our guided visualization meditations, she was able to imagine a more positive future for herself for the first time since before the war. And recently, a Palestinian woman shared that teaching TRY in her community has not only helped her better understand herself and cope with her own trauma symptoms, but is empowering other Palestinians to do the same. This is what healing looks like: integrating trauma through a variety of mind-body techniques to detach traumatic memory from intense emotion, giving us choice in our experiences to redirect our narrative and reclaim our power. In addition to testimonies like these, over the years, myself and my team have measured the impact of practicing TRY on both children and adults, and in most participants, in just 4 to 8 weeks, we've seen significant improvements in mental trauma symptoms, physical trauma symptoms, heart rate variability, and resilience levels. Both stories and statistics show us that we truly can heal ourselves by regulating our nervous systems, and even prevent the need to recover in the first place by building our resilience, enhancing our capacity to cope with and overcome traumatic situations. It's this scientific understanding paired with consistent practice that will set you up to handle whatever comes your way. Nowadays, when I think about the experience of learning about my dad's death, I still occasionally feel emotional, but more so, I feel empowered. What a priceless gift I had in those dark moments to understand what was happening in my body and to have trained my brain and body to passively self-regulate, ultimately freeing myself of having to carry around that extra weight as I grieved the largest loss of my life. And this is a gift I have dedicated my life to sharing with others so that they too can experience their own light in dark times. Rumi once said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." And so I will leave you with these questions. How might your life change if you learn to complete your stress cycles more effectively? What does a more resilient, empowered, peaceful version of you look like? We get there one breath, one movement, one aha moment at a time. And I promise, wherever you are, you can start now. Thank you.